Welcome. Yay. Good evening. I don't know if this is on. Is it on? Can you hear me? Shalom Aleichem. How's everybody doing? Yay. I'm Stephanie Singer, and I'm the Director of Arts and Ideas here at the JCC. And on behalf of everybody at the JCCSF, it's my delight to welcome you to this evening's screening of Der Dybbuk with an original live performance by Yenne Velt. We're so excited that you're here. Thank you all so much for coming. I just have a few housekeeping items before we get started. Emergency exits are located at the top of the theater and the doors in which you entered, and also down this side over here. Be calm, help your neighbor, follow directions from our house staff. Some gratitude to the entire JCCSF staff for making this evening possible. Our Roots and Culture team, events operations, production, program support, marketing, security, our board of directors, volunteers, and our generous donors. Thank you all so much. And I'd also like to thank our community partners this evening who helped to spread the word about tonight's program, near and far, Laba Bay Area, Cles, California, and the Jewish Film Institute. Thank you all. So here's how it's going to go tonight. We're going to start with a 25-minute talk with Professor Nathaniel Deutsch, who will share some details about the history and plot of the film, as well as some key moments to look forward to. And after Nathaniel's talk, we'll screen the film with Yenne Velt. The film runs about 99 minutes without intermission. And after the film, please join us in the atrium for some treats for Hanukkah. And now it's my honor to introduce Nathaniel Deutsch to our stage. Nathaniel is a professor of history and holds the Baumgarten Endowed Chair in Jewish Studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where he's served as the faculty director of the Humanities Institute for more than a decade and the chair of the University of California Consortium of Humanities Centers. His books include A Fortress in Brooklyn, Race, Real Estate, and the Making of Hasidic Williamsburg, The Lost World of Russia's Jews, Ethnography and Folklore in the Pale of Settlement, and The Jewish Dark Continent, Life and Death in the Russian Pale of Settlement. He's currently creating the Digital Minhag Project, a crowdsourced archive of Jewish customs. Let's give a warm welcome to Nathaniel Deutsch.
Hi, everybody. I want to thank Stephanie. The last time I saw Stephanie was, I don't know how many years ago, but it was in my brother's apartment on the Lower East Side in New York. So it's a little different setting, but we might have been talking about the Dybbuk. I don't remember. I also want to thank Forrest Reid, who is, yeah. If there's one person who is behind why we're all here today, it is Forrest Reid. Maybe Ansky, who you'll hear about in a second. Forrest is a former student of mine. He was a great student. He's a really very, very talented artist in different media, and as you'll see, also a very talented musician. So Forrest asked me to come tonight and to talk to you about the Dybbuk and some of the context of the film that you're going to see. I'm not sure it's going to be 25 minutes, but it won't be more than 25 minutes. I can promise you that. In fact, I'm gonna make sure of that with my trusty phone here. So I'm going to divide my talk into 4 phases, or as I'll call them, Gilgulim, which is kind of the Ashkenazi way of pronouncing a term that means reincarnations or transmigrations. Because one of the themes that's very important in the movie is this notion that souls can transmigrate or can move from one body to another. And that can happen when someone is born, but it can also happen during someone's lifetime. Now, some of you may already know that these kinds of beliefs exist in Jewish tradition. For some of you, it may be something new. In fact, it's something that we find in Jewish sources going way, spirit possession goes way back, thousands of years in Jewish tradition. The idea, some notion of reincarnation goes at least as far back as the medieval period. so roughly 1,000 years, and you see it in the first Kabbalistic works, including the Sefer Bahir and the Zohar. So the first place that I want to talk a little bit about is Tzfat, which is a city in the Galilee, so what's now northern Israel. And during the 16th century, we saw an explosion of interest in these concepts of transmigration and spirit possession. And I'll just mention a few of the types of possession. First of all, you have Gilgul, which is reincarnation. So the idea that a soul moves at birth from one body to the next. And by the way, that soul, it could be a female soul into a male body, which means that sometimes your physical sex and your spiritual gender might not align exactly. And the Kabbalists talk about what happens when that is the case. Another idea is called Magid, which is typically the soul or spirit of perhaps a biblical figure that transmigrates into the body of a living person, typically a sage, and helps that person achieve wisdom. Yosef Karo, who produced the Shulchan Aruch, which is the most important Jewish legal code, he lived in Tzfat too in the 16th century. He had a Magid. Then we have something called Ibur, which means impregnation. And that's the idea that the soul of someone enters a living person's body in order to help that person perform a mitzvah, perform some kind of commandment. Or perhaps that soul, when it was in somebody else's body, it wasn't able to perform a particular commandment, and so it transmigrates into somebody else's body to perform the commandment, and then it leaves. Which also means that you can have multiple souls in your body at the same time. Okay? Now, Ibor was seen as a positive phenomenon. It was something good. But there was the flip side of Ibor, which was when a malevolent soul would enter someone's body while they were still alive, meaning that they had two souls in their body. And that phenomenon is called Dybbuk. So that's where the term Dybbuk comes from. The root in Hebrew means to cleave onto something. And in this case, it's the soul of a malevolent soul that cleaves onto the body of a poor victim. Now, it turns out that scholars have looked at the cases of Dybbuk possession that survive, and they survive because people wrote about them. As soon as they occurred, people would write about them, and they became very popular. In a way, it was like, it's not wrong to describe them as being like a graphic novel or something, okay? As far as I know, there aren't illustrated versions of it, but they would be passed around, and people found them fascinating. In addition, of course, there were oral traditions about these Dybbuk possession cases. For example, in Koretz, there's a few places around Europe and also in the Middle East where famous instances occurred. And scholars later looked at them and they found something quite interesting, which is that a majority of the cases, the people who were possessed were young women or girls, typically entering puberty or before marriage. And they were possessed by malevolent male spirits. So quite a bit of scholar, and you'll see that a number of the things I'm talking about show up in this film as well, okay? Scholars have looked at that, and I'm not going to spend a long time on discussing why they think that's the case, but anxiety over things like arranged marriage, as well as early marriage, particularly the beginning of the 19th century, Jewish boys and girls, they were boys and girls because they were in many cases being married off when they were 12, 13, 14, etc. There was an enormous amount of anxiety about that. We know about that from memoirs, for example. And this may have been one of the ways in which girls in particular expressed that anxiety was through a phenomenon that others understood as possession. And in fact, it's clear that they also saw that as happening to them. When a Dybbuk possessed someone, the community was very upset, in part because the Dybbuk did things like grabbing a holy book, Sefer, and throwing it on the ground, debasing it, swearing, doing all sorts of things that outraged the community, and they would try to exorcise the Dybbuk. So we also, in addition to all of these cases of Dybbuk possession, we also know a lot about how they tried to exorcise these Dybbuks. And again, this is something that makes its way into the film as well. Another thing I want to mention is the importance of the cemetery in traditional Jewish life as a site of spirituality and religiosity, a site of pilgrimage even, especially during the month of Elul, which is in the fall. People would go to the cemetery and they would beseech, actually, typically they would pay a woman or women whose profession was to beseech the dead on their behalf. And they were virtuosi who were able to, and it was considered to be, if you were really good, you did it right on the spot without reading anything. And you would scream, cry, ask the dead for intercession if somebody was sick, if somebody couldn't get pregnant, and so on. And again, the film captures that sense of the cemetery, especially in Eastern Europe, among Eastern European Jews, as this crucial site of religious experience and as a place where the living and the dead commingle. Because the traditional belief among Eastern European Jews is that when you died, you didn't just go somewhere and not come back. You actually, or at least some part of you, was present or could be made present at different key moments. Okay, so there's obviously much more I could say on all of that, but that is the first Gilgal. That's stage one of my remarks. Stage two, we've now moved from Tzfat, which is where a lot of these ideas, let's say, originated. Actually, there was one more thing that I wanted to say about Tzfat, which is interesting. It's relevant in terms of the news, something that's in the news right now, which is what's going on in Syria. And you might say, what's the connection between them? Well, Tzfat is located in an area where there were many other religious communities, including Druze and Alawites. And actually in the Golan Heights, which has been in the news in the last few days, there were 3 Alawite villages for a long time. Both the Druze and the Alawites believe in reincarnation. So just as an aside, one of the reasons that this belief in reincarnation and transmigration might have become more important in Tzfat in the 16th century was perhaps because of communication between the Alawites and the Druze and the Jews in that part of what's now northern Israel and southern Syria. Okay, so these ideas, along with what's called the Lurianic Kabbalah. So the main Kabbalistic figure in Tzfat was somebody named Isaac Luria, or Ha'ari, as he's called in Hebrew. And these ideas migrated all throughout the Jewish world, to Morocco, to Yemen, to Poland, to other parts of Eastern Europe. And they became part of Jewish folk culture in those places. And they continued to be a part of that culture until the beginning of the 20th century. And this is where we arrive at phase 2, or the second Gilgal, which is, this part of the world is the source. Probably there are people out there, I can't really see you that well, by the way. Hopefully you can see me better than I can see you. But I imagine there are some of you out there whose ancestors came from what's called the Pale of Settlement. So the Pale of Settlement was a part of the western reaches of the Russian Empire, what's now Ukraine, Lithuania, some other parts of Eastern Europe, in which in 1900, 40%, if not more, of the total global Jewish population lived. And that was after massive waves of immigration starting in the early 1880s to places like the United States. Some of you may have ancestors that arrived in those waves, to Argentina, to Palestine, to Australia, etc., South Africa, etc. Okay, so very large Jewish population. And they believe in things, they continue into the 20th century to believe in things like the Dybbuk, Ibor, Gilgal, etc. However, that traditional way of life is rapidly changing because of assimilation, because of modernization, because of immigration. And the beliefs and the practices that people had, in some cases, been holding for many, many centuries start to erode. And it's at this point that someone named Ansky, that was his nickname, his birth name was Shlomi Zanvil Rappaport, okay, but he went by Ansky. He arrives on the scene. Now, Ansky, as some of you may know, was a revolutionary. He was a socialist revolutionary. He was a songwriter. He was a poet. He was a playwright, as we'll see. He was also a self-made ethnographer. He decides to go into the Pale of Settlement because, as he says, quote, "The great upheaval in Jewish life that has occurred in the last 50 to 60 years has above all devastated our folk traditions, a great many of which have already vanished. With every old man who dies, with every fire, with every exile, we lose a piece of our past. We are rapidly forgetting the most beautiful expressions of traditional life, the customs and beliefs, the old, profound poetic tales, songs, and melodies," unquote. Now, a lot of his contemporaries, including a lot of socialist revolutionaries who he hung out with, were like, great, we've got to get rid of all of this stuff. Right? We have to modernize. We have to look forwards to the future. But Ansky had a different idea. He saw all of these folk traditions as what he called the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. He saw it as another, first of all, there already was an oral Torah, okay, things like the Talmud. He said this is a different oral Torah. Whereas something like the Talmud was produced by the rabbinic elite, things like belief in the Dybbuk, and going to the cemetery and measuring it with wick and then cutting the wick into little pieces and lighting the candles like over here, which is another tradition that they would do, okay? That's the people's oral Torah. That's folk oral Torah. And he said it's important to value that and to collect it. Why? Well, not only to preserve it in things like museums, which is, he actually did establish a museum, but also because he thought that this oral Torah, all of these customs, practices, and beliefs could be given a kind of second life through a process that he called Aufleben in Yiddish, which means something like revive or perhaps renaissance. So he thought you could take all of these traditions and turn them into new cultural formations, new cultural products, new songs, new plays, etc. But rather than a recreation of the past, he saw it as something kind of old new or new old. And there's a scholar named David Roskis who describes it this way: just as the written Torah was the source of all prior Jewish creativity, so the people's old oral Torah, this language of symbol and memory, was to become the wellspring for Jewish creative artists of the future. So Ansky went about this by leading an ethnographic expedition into the Pale of Settlement. He visited around 70 shtetls before World War I started and put an end to the expedition. And on this expedition, he sat down and he used wax cylinder recording equipment and photographic equipment to record women, men, children as they told stories, as they played music, as they performed different ritual acts. And as a result of all of this research that he did, he produced, among other things, a play in 1914, probably originally written in Russian, then revised into Yiddish, which he called the Dybbuk. So the Dybbuk grew out of both this theory of Aufleben, of reviving these old Jewish traditions that were disappearing and turning them into new cultural forms, as well as his own ethnographic work. It, over the years, became the most widely produced play in Jewish theatrical history, largely because Habima, which was founded in Moscow in 1917 and then moved to Israel, made it part of their repertoire, but it's also been performed elsewhere many times. It also, and this is phase 3, or the third Gilgal, if we want to call it that, inspired a film. And this is the film that we are going to watch tonight. And the film was made in 1937 by a director named Michał Waszyński, born Moshe Vaks. Okay? Actually, a lot of the figures who were involved in these cultural productions had multiple names. He was born in Kovel in Volyn, what's now Ukraine. This was one of the 70 towns that Ansky visited. And he was born in 1904. He was there at least until World War I, so it's likely that he was a kid when Ansky visited his town. I don't know whether they had any interaction, but it's an interesting question to explore. Now, I'm not going to get into Vax's or Wyszynski's life. It was kind of a remarkable life. He converts to Catholicism at a certain point. He escapes before the Holocaust through Iran, makes his way to Western Europe, has all sorts of adventures there. While he was still in Poland, so before the Holocaust, he claimed that he had been an assistant to F.W. Murnau, who some of you may know. He was a very important German expressionist filmmaker, most famous for Nosferatu, which was a retelling of the Dracula story. I don't know whether he actually was an assistant. He told all sorts of stories about himself. But it seems that at a certain point at the end of the 1930s, he decides to make a kind of German expressionist film in Poland in Yiddish. Okay? I suspect that at the time he thought that a film in Yiddish would have more global appeal than a film in Polish. He did make a lot of Polish films. In fact, he's the most prolific Polish filmmaker prior to World War II. So it's not that he didn't make films in Polish. He did. But it's unclear exactly why he decided to make the film. I think Ansky would have been, who, by the way, had passed away by then, I think Ansky would have been happy, probably, with the idea that his play and these traditions were being remade into yet another kind of a genre, right? Revived in this way. Okay, a little bit of context. There was, of course, in addition to very vibrant Yiddish theater, which existed in Eastern Europe and in New York and in Buenos Aires and in other places, there was also Yiddish film industry, okay? And one of the things that's interesting is to compare this film to some of the other films that maybe some of you have seen. This film, unlike a lot of those films, was actually filmed on location in Kazimierz Dolny. That is one of the Städtlech, one of the small Jewish towns in eastern Poland, again, more or less right on the eve of World War II. And it lies between, we could say, the German expressionist film tradition, Polish filmmaking, and Yiddish films. Okay, so last phase, or last stage, the last Gilgul, the last stage of these Jewish traditions regarding Dybbuk and Ibor and etc., moving through time, is here in San Francisco and here at the JCC. And so what I want to do now is introduce our talent for tonight, and they are known as Yenne Velt, which is a Yiddish phrase that means something like the other world or the world to come. It is the standard way of saying, well, what's going to happen to your soul, your neshama, when you pass away, but it's not a place that you go to, as I mentioned, that you never come back from. You may come back from it, sometimes multiple times. So Yenne Velt is a kind of a super band, I would call them, because all of the members of this band belong to lots of other bands, and I'm not going to name all those bands, but a super group, I should call them. They draw on melodies from Hasidic Nigunim, so the Hasidic movement, which absorbed and transformed and transmitted a lot of the traditions I'm talking about. It started in Eastern Europe, the 18th century, in the area where the Dybbuk takes place. And one of the most important things in Hasidic culture, musical culture, is what's called a nigun, which is a melody, that kind of thing. So they are drawing on Hasidic nigunim, klezmer classics. Klezmer music is a form of Jewish music that, of course, some of you know this already, but emerges in Eastern Europe, basically from the Black Sea all the way up to the Baltic. Wonderful music. Pieces from the original film score that you will hear as well at certain points. And then other kinds of Jewish folk music, as well as other kinds of music, because they play all sorts of music. So, Yenne Velt is composed of San Francisco musicians who gig frequently as a part of the local scene, so you can see them elsewhere if you like what you hear. First, we have Forrest Reid on pedal steel guitar, Edan Mor on saxophone, Daniel Bromfield on pump organ, Christian Reynolds on bass, and Connor McNesby on percussion. Please give a warm round of applause for Yenne Velt.
Thank you, everyone. We got Connor McNesby on the drums. We got Christian Reynolds on the bass. We got Daniel Bromfield on the keys. And Edan Mor on the saxophone. And I'm Forrest Reid, I played slide guitar. We're gonna have a reception out in the atrium. There's gonna be donuts and there's gonna be chocolate. Thanks.